This is History Myths and Misconceptions, and today's myth is the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin, a piece of cloth supposedly imprinted with the image of Jesus Christ, has been debated and debunked countless times. It is an interesting artifact that tells you a thing or two about history, society, and archaeology. And that's the angle of this video, and of the majority of videos on this channel. It is not strictly about one thing. Is the Shroud of Turin authentic or is a forgery? There is not much room for discussion here. Yes, it is a forgery, plain and simple. No, it is not the burial cloth that wrapped Jesus Christ after his crucifixion, especially since Jesus Christ is a mythological character. He is as historical as Theseus or Heracles. All of these artifacts, like fragments from the cross, the spear, nails, etc., these are just religious objects, which make sense in the framework of Abrahamic religions and thus can easily be venerated. But outside of this framework, in the secular world of reason, this is just items from the snake oil salesman's pocket. So, the Shroud of Turin is an artifact that can theoretically be traced to the 14th century, although you might question the provenance of this thing. Usually, it is reported that back in the 14th century, Pope Clement VII dismissed the shroud as a forgery, which is an interesting piece of information. I mean, in the context of religious thought and all these developments around the shroud in the past 100 years. The history of the church is, let's put it this way, a notoriously deceptive discipline. So we don't really know if somebody in the 14th century labeled the shroud as a fake, but we know that this is the story that the church is telling us for some reason. I have to remind you that the Catholic Church doesn't dismiss this artifact, and actually popes say some nice poetic things about the shroud, and Pope Francis, for example, made some sort of a pilgrimage to see the thing. At the same time, the Church doesn't explicitly accept the shroud as absolutely authentic, although it apparently favors all these discussions about this mysterious image of the god and, in a way, instigates the continuation of this pointless debate around this rather bizarre relic. Carbon dating tests of the shroud were famously conducted in 1988, and the results placed this item between 1260 and 1390 AD. So some people ask why there are Christians who still believe that the Shroud of Turin is authentic even after carbon dating tests came back with such results. It is a complex question, because on the surface, it deals with religious exaltation and the concept that true faith doesn't require proof. Pope John Paul II called the Shroud of Turin a mirror of the gospel. So it is easy to stick with something like that and don't care much about what scientists say, because it is kind of irrelevant. And also, these Christians might tell you that carbon dating can't be really trusted. It produces too many errors, so the results can be off by a significant margin, and so on. The problem here is that, well, we're not gonna discuss the idea that faith doesn't require proof, but indeed, carbon dating can't be trusted, which is probably a subject for a separate video. But in short, if the test showed that the shroud was produced in the 13th or the 14th century, that in itself doesn't prove anything. Theoretically, it can even be a 20th century forgery. Carbon dating is a delicate process that can be easily thrown off by contamination. Also, the ratio of C14 to C12 in the atmosphere has not been constant throughout history, so scientists use calibration curves to compensate. And the calibration curves are constantly being revised. The carbon dating test alone cannot confirm anything. You cannot rely on it. You can use it only as one of the tools, not the only tool. You also might think that once the calibration is updated, scientists go and run new tests all over again. Well, usually no. only occasionally. On top of that, there's also a practice when people who conduct these tests ask for additional information on the item they are testing. Basically, an estimation of what period we are talking about, a ballpark figure. This fact alone may actually completely ruin your faith in carbon dating. So when religious enthusiasts dismiss the carbon dating of the Shroud, pointing out that it happened in 1988, there was only one fragment tested, nobody conducted a new test, and there are serious suspicions about the accuracy of the whole process, they are not wrong. And that explains why people are still trying to provide new ways to date the Shroud, which includes a relatively recent attempt when Italian scientists came up with the conclusion that, we have a new way to determine the age of the thing, and in fact, it actually can be 2000 years old. They used a new method which inspects the structural degradations of the fabric using X-ray. A few years later, the research made it into the headlines, it was misinterpreted by tabloids, and here we go again. But obviously, the flawed carbon dating method is not the only piece of information that dismisses the Shroud as an actual burial cloth of Jesus. Everything is off there. This print defies anatomy and gravity, the whole idea that this print was produced by some divine energy, the cloth itself, the traditional idea of burial practices of ancient Israelites, the provenance of this artifact, etc. And yeah, the fact that, once again, Jesus is a fictional character to begin with. And yes, the Shroud can be quite easily replicated. You don't need any complex technology for that. It's been done before by researchers. You basically can just make a painting on a glass, then you put this glass on a piece of fabric and leave it in the sun for a couple of weeks. Sprinkle it with some blood in strategic places, and there you go. This artifact is not as mysterious as it is frequently presented. And what is more important, it doesn't deserve all this attention. There are at least 4 documented severed heads of John the Baptist. One in Damascus, one in Rome, one in Amiens, and another one is in Munich. Let's discuss every couple of years which of them is authentic, the mysterious stories surrounding these precious skulls and miracles. Because miracles are a thing, and John the Baptist is a real historical figure who just so happened to be born with at least 4 heads. We never do anything of this sort, because it is simply mental. Why would we seriously discuss the Shroud of Turin?